The rusted key did not look like anything special. It was small, iron-colored, with a bent loop on one end and 3 worn teeth on the other. Yet every morning, without fail, it appeared on the ground outside Daniel Reyes' quarters at the edge of the Hollow Reach outpost. Daniel found it for the 7th day in a row, and this time, he decided to stop wondering and start watching. He picked it up carefully. It was cold, like it had been outside all night, though the door log showed nothing had crossed the sensor line until just moments ago. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the worn grooves left by hands that were not his own. Then he heard the soft flap of wings above him. A small creature hovered near the roof edge, watching him with round golden eyes. It had a slim body covered in blue-gray scales, thin wings that caught the early light, and a long tail that curled and uncurled like it was thinking. It was no bigger than a large bird, but there was nothing bird-like about the way it studied him, patient and careful, like it was waiting for him to understand something. Daniel had seen the creature before. The other engineers called it a Virian hatchling, one of the small dragon-like animals that lived near the old ruins outside the outpost fence. Most people ignored them. They were common enough, seen gliding over the canyon walls at dusk, never bothering anyone. But this one was different. This one kept coming back to the same spot, at the same time, carrying the same key. He held the key up toward it. It tilted its head, made a soft clicking sound in its throat, and flew off toward the ruins without taking the key back. That was strange, too. If it wanted the key, why leave it behind every single time? Daniel brought the key inside and set it on his desk. He told himself he would ask around the outpost that day. Maybe someone would know why a wild animal kept dropping the same object at his door. He was wrong to think it would be a simple answer. At breakfast, he mentioned it to 2 of the local Virian workers who helped run the water systems. Their reaction was not curiosity. It was fear. One of them, an older worker with faded scales along his jaw, stopped eating completely and asked Daniel, in a low voice, if the key had come from the northern ruins. When Daniel said he did not know, the worker told him to leave it outside and never touch it again. Then he walked away without finishing his meal. That kind of reaction was rare among the Virians, who Daniel had always found calm and slow to speak about anything unless they were certain of it. He brought it up later with Director Holt, the head of the outpost, hoping for some record or explanation. Holt barely looked up from his tablet. He said the outpost had enough real problems, broken filtration lines, late supply shipments, without wasting time chasing after a bird and a rusty key. He told Daniel to focus on his actual work, which was maintaining the water systems, not playing detective with local wildlife. Daniel did not argue, but he did not let it go either. That night, he decided to test something simple. He placed the key inside a locked drawer in his room, turned the small mechanical lock himself, and checked twice that it was secure. If the hatchling wanted the key back, it would need to get through a locked drawer in a locked room, without leaving so much as a scratch. He barely slept, half expecting to hear scratching at his window or wings against the roof. Nothing happened. The night was quiet, the same as every other night at the outpost, wind moving softly over the canyon and distant machinery humming somewhere near the water plant. When morning came, Daniel woke before his alarm and went straight to the drawer. He unlocked it, already half sure the key would still be there. It was not. The drawer was empty, the lock untouched, no sign that anything had been forced or broken. He stepped outside, and there it was again, sitting on the same spot on the ground, the same small rusted key with its bent loop and 3 worn teeth, waiting for him like it had never left at all. Above him, on the roof edge, the little blue-gray creature watched him with those same patient golden eyes, as if it already knew what he would find before he even looked. Daniel picked up the key again, turning it slowly in his fingers. Somewhere out past the outpost fence, past the canyon walls, there had to be an answer. A locked drawer could not stop this. Fear from the Virians could not explain it either. Whatever this key meant, whatever door it might once have opened, one thing had become clear to him standing there in the cool morning air. This was not the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. Dust rose in thin clouds every time Daniel pulled another data drive from the archive shelves. The outpost record room was small, tucked behind the main office, filled with old drives and paper files nobody had touched in years. He was looking for anything that mentioned a hollow, a vault, or old Virian ruins connected to keys or locked doors. Most of what he found was useless: supply logs, mining reports, weather data going back decades. Then he found a single file, half corrupted, labeled only with a string of numbers and the words sealed hollow, access denied. The rest of the file would not open. Whatever was inside had been locked away just as tightly as whatever door the key belonged to. He brought his findings to Elder Cass, the oldest member of the Virian Council and someone most humans avoided speaking to directly. She lived in a modest stone home near the canyon edge, away from the noise of the outpost. When Daniel explained what he had found and showed her the key, her expression changed immediately. She did not reach for it. She stepped back from it. She told him, in careful words, that some doors were closed for good reasons, and that the young ones of her kind, the small dragon-like hatchlings, sometimes carried old habits nobody remembered teaching them. She said the key was not a toy, not a puzzle for him to solve, but a memory of something painful, something her people had chosen to leave buried. Daniel asked her directly what happened at the hollow. She was silent for a long moment, then said only that it should stay a memory, nothing more. She asked him to return the key to where he found it, and to stop asking questions that even her own people no longer had answers to. He left her home with more questions than before, not fewer. On his way back to the outpost, he ran into Mira Okafor, the young liaison officer who worked between the human staff and the Virian Council. Unlike most of the others, Mira had always been willing to talk honestly with him, even about things the council preferred to keep quiet. She listened as he explained what Elder Cass had said. She did not look surprised. She told him that generations ago, before the outpost existed, before humans had even reached this part of space, the Virians had technology far beyond anything they used now. Something happened, she said, something big enough that her people chose to give it all up rather than risk it happening again. Nobody spoke of it directly. It was simply understood, passed down as an unspoken rule, that the old ruins were not to be disturbed. Daniel asked her if she believed the key was connected to that event. She hesitated, then admitted she thought it might be. She had seen old Virian art showing figures holding similar shapes, always near images of a large door built into a hillside. If the key really came from that time, it would not just be old. It would be dangerous in a way nobody currently alive fully understood. That evening, Daniel examined the key more closely under a work light in his quarters. He had assumed it was simple, maybe hand-carved by early settlers or some forgotten craftsman. But looking closer, he noticed something he had missed before. The teeth on the key were cut with a precision no simple tool could manage. The metal itself was a strange alloy, resistant to rust in most places despite its worn appearance, as if it had been built to last far longer than anything else on the planet. This was not primitive work. This was something engineered, something made by people who understood metal and mechanics in ways the current Virians no longer practiced. Whatever the hollow was, whatever waited behind that sealed door, it belonged to a version of this world that no longer existed, one buried under generations of silence and fear. Daniel sat with that thought long into the night. He thought about Elder Cass stepping back from the key like it might burn her. He thought about Myra's quiet worry and the old art she described, figures holding a key near a door in the hillside. Whatever happened at that hollow had left a mark deep enough to change an entire species, deep enough that they gave up their own advanced knowledge just to make sure they would never touch it again. He knew he should probably respect that. He knew Director Holt would tell him to drop it entirely, that it was not his place to dig into another species' buried history. But sitting there with the key resting in his palm, feeling its strange, careful weight, Daniel could not shake the feeling that whatever this fear was built on, it was not the whole story. Somewhere out past the ruins, behind a door nobody dared open, something was still waiting. And every morning, a lost hatchling kept trying to lead him straight to it. Small scraps of dried fish sat untouched on the flat stone outside Daniel's door for 3 mornings before the hatchling finally came close enough to eat them. Daniel had started leaving out food after noticing how thin the young creature looked beneath its scales, ribs faintly visible along its sides when it stretched its wings in the morning light. It never took anything from his hand, but little by little, it stopped flying away the moment it dropped the key. He learned to move slowly around it, to sit down instead of standing, to speak in a low, steady voice even though he doubted it understood the words. What mattered, he thought, was the tone. Animals everywhere seemed to understand tone before anything else. Over the following days, the hatchling began staying longer after each visit, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes long enough to finish the food Daniel left out before flying back toward the ruins. He decided to give it a name, mostly for his own sake, since he had grown tired of calling it the hatchling in his head every morning. He settled on Rune, thinking of the strange markings carved faintly into the key's handle, small symbols worn nearly smooth by time. It felt right, a small nod to the mystery that had brought them together in the first place. Watching Rune closely, Daniel began to notice things that troubled him. There were no adult Virians nearby, ever. No older dragon-like figures came looking for the hatchling. No nest visible anywhere near the outpost. When he asked Mira about it, she confirmed what he had started to suspect. Young Virians were normally raised in groups, cared for by several adults at once. A hatchling wandering alone, without any of its kind nearby, was almost unheard of. Something had happened to Rune's family, though nobody could say exactly what. That explained, at least partly, why the hatchling clung so tightly to its strange morning ritual. If it had lost the adults who once cared for it, whatever instinct guided it toward that key and that door might be the only steady thing left in its young life. Daniel found himself feeling far more protective of the small creature than he expected. He began looking forward to the mornings, to the soft flap of wings above his roof, to the quiet moment when Rune would land and watch him with those patient golden eyes. Not everyone at the outpost shared his growing interest. Director Holt called him into the main office one afternoon, clearly frustrated. Reports had reached him that Daniel was spending outpost time and supplies on a wild animal instead of focusing on his actual duties. Holt reminded him that the outpost existed to keep water systems running, supply routes open, and human lives safe, not to chase local folklore about buried doors and cursed hollows. Daniel tried to explain what he had learned, about the precision of the key, about Elder Cass's fear, about the missing adults, and Rune's strange loyalty to an old ritual nobody could explain. Holt was not moved. He told Daniel plainly that understanding the Virians mattered only as far as it kept the outpost running smoothly, and that chasing mysteries belonged to scientists with proper funding, not water engineers with unfinished maintenance logs. Daniel left the office frustrated but not convinced. He thought about how the outpost had been built so close to Virian land, how human presence here depended entirely on some level of trust and understanding between the two peoples, and how ignoring something this important seemed short-sighted at best. If the key really connected to whatever disaster had changed Virian history forever, understanding it might matter more to the outpost's future than any water filter ever could. That evening, something different happened. Rune arrived as usual, dropped the key at Daniel's feet, and instead of flying off toward the ruins right away, it stayed. It hopped closer than it ever had before, settling onto the stone step just a few feet from where Daniel sat. For a long while, neither of them moved. The wind passed quietly over the canyon, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant water. Daniel looked at the small creature beside him, no longer just a mystery to solve or a strange piece of local wildlife, but something closer to a companion who trusted him enough to simply stay. He thought about the sealed door waiting somewhere in the ruins, the fear that surrounded it, and the quiet hope in Rune's patient golden eyes every single morning. Whatever waited behind that door, Daniel understood now that Rune was not just leading him toward a mystery. It was waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to finally follow it all the way home. Dawn had barely touched the canyon rim when Daniel decided he would not wait by his door another morning. He rose before his alarm, laced his boots quickly, and stepped outside just as Rune landed on the stone step, key in its small claws as always. This time, instead of watching the hatchling drop it and fly off, Daniel picked up the key, tucked it into his jacket, and followed. Rune seemed to notice immediately. It circled once above him, almost surprised, before angling off toward the canyon instead of its usual path over the outpost fence. Daniel moved quickly to keep up, climbing over loose rock and dry brush as the little creature led him further from the outpost than he had ever gone before. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint mineral smell of old stone. After nearly an hour of walking, the canyon opened into a wide, shadowed hollow surrounded by cliff walls covered in faded carvings. Daniel slowed his pace, taking in the scale of the place. Old stone pillars stood half buried in dust, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and time. At the far end of the hollow, built directly into the rock face, stood a massive door, its surface a mix of stone and dull gray metal, far too precise and structured to be anything but built with intention. Rune landed near the base of the door and waited, wings folded, golden eyes fixed on Daniel like it had been waiting its entire short life for exactly this moment. Daniel approached slowly, running his hand along the door's cold surface. At its center sat a small, worn keyhole, its shape matching the teeth of the key perfectly. He had barely reached into his jacket for the key when he heard footsteps behind him. Elder Cass and Mira had followed him from the outpost, moving quickly despite the rocky ground. Cass's expression was not anger, but something closer to fear held tightly under control. She told him to step away from the door immediately, that some things were sealed for reasons far older and far heavier than his curiosity could understand. Daniel turned to face her, key still in hand. He asked her plainly what exactly had happened here. What disaster had frightened her people enough to abandon not just this hollow, but their own advanced knowledge entirely? Cass hesitated, clearly torn between old fear and the growing pressure of the moment. Mira stepped in gently, reminding the elder that avoiding the truth had not made it disappear. It had only left it to a lost hatchling and a stubborn human to stumble into instead. Cass finally spoke, her voice low and heavy. Long before the outpost, before humans had even reached this part of space, her people had built great things here, things meant to protect their future. Something went wrong, a failure so severe that many were lost, including most of the adults who might have explained what truly happened. In their grief, the survivors chose to seal the hollow entirely, believing it safer to forget than to risk repeating whatever mistake had caused the disaster. Daniel listened carefully, understanding now why the fear ran so deep. But he also thought about Rune, orphaned and alone, carrying a key it could not fully understand toward a door it could not open on its own. He thought about the outpost, built on land these very ruins overlooked, standing on a foundation of unanswered fear passed silently between two species who barely spoke to each other about anything that truly mattered. He told Cass, as gently as he could, that leaving a door sealed did not undo whatever tragedy had happened behind it. It only left the truth buried along with whatever answers, or warnings, or even help might still remain inside. He reminded her that Rune had returned this same key every single morning, without fail, as if something deep inside the hatchling refused to let this moment be forgotten completely. Cass did not answer right away. She looked at Rune, still waiting patiently by the door, then back at Daniel, key held steady in his hand. Something in her expression shifted, not full agreement, but a quiet, reluctant understanding that perhaps this had gone beyond her ability to stop. Daniel turned back to the door. He fitted the key carefully into the worn keyhole, feeling it settle into place with a soft, precise click that seemed impossible for something so old and rusted on the outside. He looked once more at Rune, who watched him with steady, trusting eyes, then back at Mira and Cass standing tense behind him. He turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum began deep beneath the ground, vibrating up through the stone beneath his boots, growing steadily louder as ancient machinery, silent for generations, slowly began to wake. The hum beneath the ground grew into a deep, steady vibration, strong enough that Daniel felt it through the soles of his boots. Slowly, with a grinding sound like stone dragging against stone, the massive door began to shift inward, revealing a dark passage lit faintly by pale blue light somewhere deep inside. Cool, stale air rushed out, carrying a scent of old metal and dust that had not moved in generations. Rune darted forward immediately, disappearing into the passage without hesitation. Daniel hurried after it, ignoring Cass's sharp warning behind him. Mira followed close behind, urging the elder along despite her clear fear. Inside, the passage opened into a wide chamber built from smooth stone walls lined with dim, pulsing lights. At the center sat rows of large, curved pods, each one glowing faintly with the same pale blue light, arranged carefully around a raised platform. Daniel approached slowly, realizing what he was looking at. The pods were not machines or storage units. They were eggs, Virian eggs, protected and preserved for far longer than should have been possible. Above the platform floated a soft, shifting light, taking shape slowly into the faint outline of a large dragon figure, far bigger than any Virian Daniel had ever seen, its presence somehow both fragile and immense at the same time. Before anyone could speak, the chamber lights flared bright red, and a low mechanical voice echoed from hidden speakers, warning of unauthorized intrusion. Thin metal arms unfolded from the walls, moving with sharp, precise motions clearly built for defense rather than welcome. Cass froze completely, old fear locking her in place, while Mira grabbed her arm and pulled her back toward the passage entrance. Daniel's mind raced. Old defense systems clearly still recognized threats the same way they had generations ago, unable to tell the difference between danger and desperate curiosity. He looked toward Rune, who had moved directly beneath the floating shape above the platform, wings spread wide, chirping softly upward as if trying to explain something the systems could not translate on their own. Thinking quickly, Daniel stepped forward, raising both hands slowly, showing them empty and open. He spoke calmly, explaining out loud, even though he doubted the system could fully understand him, that they meant no harm, that a lost hatchling had led him here, that the key had been returned every single morning as if begging someone to finally listen. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, refusing to give the defense arms any reason to see him as a threat. The floating shape above the platform shifted, brightening slightly as it focused entirely on Rune. A soft pulse of light passed between them, and slowly, the red warning lights dimmed back to a calm blue. The metal arms folded back into the walls, retreating as quickly as they had appeared. The mechanical voice fell silent, replaced by a softer tone, almost like a whisper carried on wind, forming words in the old Virian language that even Mira struggled to translate quickly enough. Cass finally found her voice again, though it trembled with disbelief. She explained, piecing together the fragmented words, that the shape above the platform was the preserved mind of an ancient Virian matriarch, placed into a protective state long ago to guard the last surviving eggs after a disaster nearly wiped out her people entirely. The matriarch had waited, patient and unmoving, for the right person to return not with force, but with care, trust, and the small hatchling she recognized instantly as her own last living kin. The truth of the disaster finally came clear. It had not been reckless ambition that destroyed the old Virian civilization, but a terrible accident during an experiment meant to protect their future. In their grief, survivors chose silence and fear over understanding, sealing away not just the failure, but every piece of knowledge connected to it, including the last hope hidden safely within this very chamber. Rune moved closer to the floating shape, and something in the matriarch's presence softened even further, warmth radiating gently through the chamber like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. Daniel watched quietly, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him. A door sealed out of fear had just been reopened not by force, but by patience, curiosity, and a lost hatchling's simple, stubborn hope. Cass stood silently beside the platform, tears forming at the edges of her old eyes as she looked upon a piece of her people's history she never expected to see again. Mira placed a steady hand on her shoulder, offering quiet support. Daniel looked at Rune, finally reunited with the only family it had left, and understood that whatever came next, this small chamber and everything it held would change far more than just one lost hatchling's future. News of the sealed hollow spread through the outpost faster than any supply shortage or storm warning ever had. By the time Daniel returned from the ruins, word had already reached Director Holt, who met him at the gate with a mix of disbelief and quiet frustration that things had gone this far without his knowledge. Yet even Holt could not ignore what the discovery meant once Mira and Elder Cass explained it fully to the Council and Outpost leadership together. The Virian Council gathered within the day, an unusual move for a group known for slow, careful decisions. Elder Cass spoke first, admitting openly that generations of silence had nearly cost her people their last hope of recovery. She credited Daniel directly, telling the council that his refusal to simply walk away from an unanswered mystery had done what decades of careful avoidance never could, brought their history back into the light, instead of leaving it buried in fear. Not everyone agreed easily. Some council members worried about what else might lie hidden within the ruins, or whether reopening old technology risked repeating whatever mistake had caused the original disaster. Mira argued strongly against continued silence, reminding them that fear alone had already cost enough. Slowly, cautiously, the council agreed to allow careful study of the chamber, with both Virian and human specialists working together under strict guidance from the awakened matriarch herself. Director Holt, for his part, admitted privately to Daniel that he had been wrong to dismiss the entire situation as a distraction. Whatever tension existed before between human priorities and Virian caution, the outpost now stood at the center of the most significant discovery either side had made since first contact. Holt even adjusted outpost schedules to allow Daniel time to continue working directly with Mira and the council on understanding the vault safely. Through it all, Rune remained close to Daniel, though its bond with the ancient matriarch and the surviving eggs clearly meant everything to it as well. The hatchling split its time between the outpost and the ruins, often leading small groups of researchers safely through the hollow, chirping happily whenever Daniel joined the visits. The defense systems, once quick to see intruders as threats, had grown calm under the matriarch's careful guidance, recognizing now the difference between danger and genuine care. Weeks passed, and slowly, cautiously, the relationship between humans and Virians at the outpost began to shift. Where fear and distance once stood, small moments of shared understanding started taking root instead. Human engineers learned pieces of old Virian design from studying the vault's remaining systems, while Virian workers grew more willing to share stories and history they had once kept carefully hidden away. Daniel found himself, more often than not, sitting near the hollow's entrance in the early evenings, watching the last light fade over the canyon while Rune rested nearby, no longer alone, no longer carrying the weight of an unexplained ritual with no one to understand it. The key itself now sat safely within the chamber, its purpose finally fulfilled, though Daniel kept a small, carefully made copy on his desk as a quiet reminder of everything that single object had led to. One morning, weeks after that first hum of ancient machinery waking beneath the ground, Daniel stepped outside his quarters to find Rune waiting exactly where it always had, on the same stone step, at almost the same early hour. This time, though, there was no key clutched in its claws, no urgent ritual demanding to be repeated. Instead, Rune simply landed beside him, settling in close, content to share the quiet morning without needing anything more. Daniel smiled, sitting down beside the small creature that had changed so much simply by refusing to give up on a lost, unexplained routine. He thought back to that very first morning, finding a rusted key on the ground, and choosing curiosity over dismissal, patience over frustration. He thought about Elder Cass's fear slowly turning into cautious hope, about Holt's grudging respect, about Myra's steady support through every uncertain step. Somewhere beyond the outpost fence, past the canyon walls, the ancient matriarch continued watching over her last surviving kin, no longer alone in her long, patient wait. The vault that fear had sealed away for generations now stood open, not as a danger to be feared, but as a bridge finally built between two peoples who had spent far too long standing apart. As the sun rose fully over the hollow reach, casting warm light across the quiet outpost, Daniel understood clearly that this was never really about a single key or a single locked door. It had always been about trust, patience, and the simple, stubborn choice to keep showing up, morning after morning, until someone finally answered.